Thanks, Matt. And I'm very pleased to see everyone here today as we continue the conversation about Michigan's challenges and successes around talent retention and attraction and economic development. And very pleased today to have folks here from various organizations, as I screw up the PowerPoint. There we go. Working in that particular area. First, we have Ryan Hundt, who's CEO of the Michigan Works Association. Ryan connects with various stakeholders to generate enthusiasm for workforce development policies and priorities that will positively impact Michigan businesses and workers. He focuses on building cooperation across the state while orchestrating the efforts of the Michigan Works staff, board members, and other stakeholders. Prior to joining Michigan Works, Ryan spent 8 years with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and most recently, he served as a Regional Director of Growth and Development at MEDC. Also with us is Tim Sowton. Tim is Vice President of Public Policy and Research at Business Leaders for Michigan, the state's business roundtable, where he is responsible for policy advocacy, policy development, and supporting the organization's benchmarking efforts. As an organization, Business Leaders for Michigan is composed exclusively of the executive leaders of Michigan's largest companies and universities. Members drive 40% of the state's economy, employ more than 500,000 people, and generate over $1 trillion in annual revenue, as well as serving more than half of all Michigan public university students. Prior to joining Business Leaders for Michigan, Tim was Regional Director of Government Relations for R.L. Polk & Company out of Southfield, Michigan. He also served for 9 years in the administration of former Governor John Engler, holding several positions focusing on policy and legislation, with his last position being Deputy Director of Legislative Affairs. And third, we have Brad Williams, who's Vice President of Government Relations for the Greater Detroit Chamber of Commerce. A lifelong Michigander, Williams delivers over 2 decades of experience at the highest levels of politics and public policy. Brad provides oversight of the Chamber's lobby team that delivers the voice of business in the state capitol and regional leaders. The Detroit Regional Chamber is one of the oldest, largest, and most respected chambers of commerce in the country, having served Southeast Michigan's business community for more than 100 years. As a respected leader, Williams has served as the voice for business for ballot efforts on behalf of public transit, road funding, and business tax reform. Prior to his service at the Chamber, Williams began his career as a staff member in the Michigan Legislature and the Michigan Department of Transportation. In 2018, he took temporary leave and served as a senior advisor to then Governor-elect Gretchen Whitmer during her transition. So please let's welcome these gentlemen here today. And first, I believe it's Brad.
Good afternoon, everybody. Importantly, Arnold left out of my bio. He did mention that I was a staff member in the Michigan Legislature. What he didn't mention that was on my 22nd birthday was the day I got a call from Arnold when he offered me a job in the Michigan Legislature. The pay was just slightly above poverty wages, but it was more than the Senate was offering, so I took it. So I would not be standing here today, likely if it weren't for work for Arnold. So I appreciate it. I remember I called my parents right after that and said, "Can you believe that they think my brain is worth this much money a year?" And now looking back, it was probably worth just about that much money a year. We wanted to spend some time today talking about a project that we at the Chamber undertook with our friends here at Business Leaders for Michigan. Tim and I are going to take up the first section of this program today, and then we're going to hand it over to Ryan. We have a long partnership with Business Leaders for Michigan. As many of you probably remember, they started as Detroit Renaissance, and so that partnership was robust then, and they've since grown into a statewide organization, and it's continued. We have, for the last several years, shared a polling company, the Glengarriff Group, who many of you probably recognize. They do the polling for Channel 4 and the Detroit News. And we at the Chamber do a number of public policy polls We aim them not to be political by nature. We aim them to help inform policymakers. And so these are available to policymakers and the public. I'd encourage you to go and check them out. We try and make them as evergreen as possible. You can go find them at detroitchamber.com/advocacy, and there's more details on the poll that we're going to talk about today. But we decided with Business Leaders for Michigan to go in together and do a poll of Michiganders age 18 to 29. And this came in part because talent has long been a shared priority amongst the two organizations. And when Governor Whitmer announced the Growing Michigan Together Council, both Tim and I's bosses were appointed to the Growing Michigan Together Council, and some of you may remember there was a little bit of a to-do that very few members of the youth population, in fact, no members of the youth population were appointed to the initial members of the Growing Michigan Together Council. And so this was an effort to make sure that the voices of young Michiganders were well represented. And so, as you might expect, this is a really difficult population to poll. I don't see a ton of folks who are age 18 to 29 in the room, but I know there we go in the back. How many times in the back do you answer your cell phone if it's a number you don't recognize?
Well, I mean, my job is constituent services, so every time.
Okay, so you do it every time, but most of your peers, I'm guessing, don't. So this is an incredibly difficult population to poll, but we were able to get it done with our partners at the Glen-Garrett Group, and we were able to find some really interesting information Tim and I are going to share with you. First of all, one of the things we discovered pretty early on is that 18 to 29-year-olds, they don't really want things that are that much different from what their parents want. And as I was thinking about this, it occurred to me that their parents are Gen Xers, and I'm also a Gen Xer, and so that was a real staggering realization for me as well. But when you think about what they want from their government, the first step is to get the basics right. And to do them excellently. Things like infrastructure, good schools and education, safe communities, and for those of us who aren't part of this generation, if we think back to when we were in this generation, think back to what you wanted back then, right? We weren't necessarily, we weren't thinking about kind of cool communities and those sorts of things, but we were also thinking about the families we didn't have yet. And it bears out in this survey that they're starting to think about maybe the families they don't have yet. The other thing to keep in mind is that jobs in the economy are still critical. There's room to talk about social issues and other things, but none of this is really comes into play unless we have a growing and dynamic economy for our young folks. That said, social policies do matter. We've heard a lot of conversation about this, particularly last year during the election as we were going through the abortion question, and they do matter to Michiganders age 18 to 29. We did not want to presume, though, that they were a monolith, and they all fell on the left-hand side of the spectrum. So we did the responsible thing. We thought in our mind and asked the next question. We asked, do abortion rights matter, and which side do you fall on? Do LGBTQ rights matter, and which side do you fall on? Do guns matter, and which side do you fall on? It turns out our assumptions were correct, that the predominantly voters on this side in this generation do fall on the left side of the spectrum, but we wanted to make sure that our assumptions were correct before we made any assumptions there. All right. So this is, I think, if you only remember one statistic from this survey, this is the most important thing to remember, and that is that 64% of folks age 18 to 29 who currently live in Michigan think they're going to live here in 10 years. That's not a great number. I don't think anyone thinks that's a good number. And more upsetting, the numbers get worse the more you drill it down. Folks who aren't natives, so folks who may be coming to U of M or MSU from out of state, only 52% of them think they're going to be living here in 10 years. The good news is 79% of Michiganders who are married think they're going to be here in 10 years, but that's such a small fraction of this population. The rest of them, it's only 59% of them think they're going to be here in 10 years. And worst of all, the population least likely age 18 to 29 to be in Michigan 10 years from now are those with bachelor's degrees and above. And we have set a statewide goal of wanting to have 60% of our population with a degree by 2030. The population with a bachelor's degree and above is the population least likely to stay in Michigan. So we have work to do. We have trends that we need to reverse. So we also know, though, what makes Michigan sticky for folks. There's a few things. Like I mentioned, marital status. People who are married to someone who is from Michigan, either a Michigan guy or a Michigan girl, tend to want to stay in Michigan. If they have family in Michigan, that tends to make them want to stay. Being born in Michigan, of course, makes them want to stay. So one of the questions is, are there policy implications to any of these? Are there any things that policymakers can do? I don't think we're in a position where we want to do arranged marriages, but certainly there are things that maybe we can learn. Like I mentioned before, the economy certainly does matter to this population pretty considerably. And they're actually rather optimistic about Michigan's economic future. I think if you were to overlay how other age groups feel about Michigan's economic future, I don't think you'd see 75% of most optimistic about Michigan's long-term economic future. So that actually is some good news. We've got something good coming out of this poll. Last thing I'm going to go over before I hand it off to Tim, and then I'll come back to finish this up, is kind of benchmarking where Michigan's at compared to other states. I think this first graphic here shows you is that there is a persistent kind of 15% here, 19% in the other poll who have a pessimistic view of the economy overall. They think Michigan's less competitive than other states. They think Michigan doesn't have a good long-term economic outcome. So if you look over to the right, we started asking those folks why they think Michigan's not going to be strong going forward, and there was nothing that really jumped out. So there's that 15 to 19% that is cranky about the economy. I can tell you as an organization that polls about economic questions pretty consistently. That's not out of the ordinary. There's generally going to be a 20% that's cranky on economic questions regardless. More interesting here, I think, is those folks who think Michigan is doing as well or better than other states. We've got a good solid majority that thinks Michigan's doing about as well as other states. It's the 21% who thinks Michigan is doing better than other states. Those are the folks that I think we really need to capitalize on. With that, I'm about halfway through some of the information. Tim is going to step up here and share some of the other information and some of the activities that business leaders are doing to address some of these issues. So I'll hand it off to Tim.
Thank you, Brad, and good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see some familiar faces out there, Mr. Fowler, Mr. Waymeyer, others that I haven't met. Welcome. I understand that, you may be experiencing a disconnect with a 50-year-old with a salt and pepper beard up here talking about what 18 to 29-year-olds think. I assure you that Brad and I, who I think is, 29 is well into the rearview mirror. These are not our opinions. These are the opinions of 18 to 29-year-olds. Richard Schuba, who is our pollster of Glenn Gariff, has been doing this a long time and is very good at it. And so, diving a little bit deeper, dovetailing off here, this last slide that Brad covered. There are, first of all, let me go back to the 64% number that you mentioned at the beginning. I would just say fate is not forecast is not fate. We do have an opportunity to keep more of these folks here, and some of the data I'm going to share now will help hopefully illustrate where those opportunities lie. We looked at where these 18 to 29-year-olds, these young residents are moving, and the data from the Census Bureau surveys. I think that Michigan State, other universities have done about where their graduates are moving to. Clearly, Chicago is a popular location, the coasts, warm weather locations, data hubs around the country. And so we asked folks, we said, comparing Michigan to places like California, Texas, and Chicago, if the job, and pardon me, I see this is 50 years old. If you were if you were offered similar job opportunities, similar salaries, would you choose to live in Michigan or California? 89% said they would choose to live in Michigan. About 10% said they would choose California. And of those individuals who said they would choose California, half talked about the warmer weather and the ocean beaches. Now, personally, I don't really get that, the ocean beaches. I've been to San Diego. The sand is kind of, I don't know, it seemed kind of volcanic and gritty. I take Lake Michigan every time. And then breaking it down on a partisan basis, I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised to learn that strong Democrats would be the most likely to choose California over Michigan. Virtually no Republicans and no independents would choose California over Michigan. 6.5% of men would, 13.4% of women. Texas, 80% would choose to stay in Michigan, about 18% would choose Texas, and on a partisan breakdown, it's kind of the reverse of California, with independents and Republicans being more likely to choose Texas, Democrats less so. It is interesting, some Democrats, 11% strong Democrats, would still go to Texas, but the reasons why Democrats would choose Texas and Republicans would choose Texas are very different. Republicans would choose Texas because it's conservative, has no income tax, better government, cheaper costs. Democrats, weather. It's pure and simple, just the weather. Chicago, I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised to learn, is also a big draw for Democrats. When we asked respondents whether they would choose Chicago or Michigan, 87% Michigan, about 11% Chicago. And here, the reason why, as you might imagine, is 19% said they like the big city feel. That's the main reason folks would choose to go there. Some, second biggest reason, family and friends there. Third biggest reason, there's more to do there. Not surprising. Then we asked an open-ended question. After Texas, California, and Chicago, are there any other locations around the country that you would be interested in moving to instead of Michigan? Top of the list, 6.3% said Florida. Next, 4% Colorado, 3.3% New York, 2.8% North Carolina, 2.7% Georgia. 55% of the respondents who chose Florida were Republican, 58% choosing Colorado were Democrat, 55% choosing New York were Democrat, 71% choosing North Carolina were Democrat. That one surprised me a little bit because the government's pretty conservative there. 38% of respondents choosing Georgia were African American, but overall, young Republican respondents were, those who tended to vote Republican were more likely to stay in the state. Democrats and independents more likely to leave. Then we looked at how, this broke down in terms of education level, and some interesting data here in terms of, comparing just Chicago versus Michigan and Texas versus Michigan. The more highly educated individuals, more likely to choose Chicago over Michigan. The opposite when it came to Texas. Those with a bachelor's degree or higher, more likely to stay. Those with only a high school degree or an associate's degree, more likely to choose Texas. Texas. But we know that, while all things are not, those questions were if all things were created equal, what would you choose? We know all things are not created equal, and so we wanted to find out what factors were most likely to influence these decisions, these 18 to 29-year-olds. So we gave them a list. We sort of predetermined a list and asked them to rank each category on a 1 to 10 scale, with 1 being not important, 10 being very important. And coming in, number 1 with a rating of 8.6 was the cost of housing and rent. That would be the highest and most important consideration when choosing to live in Michigan or somewhere else. Second at 8.3, low crime rates. Third at 7.9, affordability and availability of higher education or job training. And then coming in tied for fourth at 7.6, first, what the state's position is in protecting individual rights related to race, LGBTQ issues, and abortion, and being close to other family members. And the important thing to note here is that those top 4 categories that you see on the list there, housing, crime, higher education, job training, and individual rights, those were consistent across sort of categories, whether you were deciding to stay in Michigan, unsure, or definitely leaving. Those 4 were the same for all of those individuals. Delving a little bit deeper into some of those social issues specifically that Brad mentioned, it's, we asked specific questions about how important a state's position was on gun laws, on protecting LGBTQ rights, racial equality policies, and then, reproductive rights, and policies on access to abortion. And, on the first one in particular, gun rights, among men, no, I'm sorry, I guess that's the wrong one here, just a second. Here we go, sorry. On gun rights, 60% of respondents said it would be important, what a state's position was there, and they support the laws. A majority of every demographic group, with the exception of rural, strong Republicans, leaning Republicans, or respondents that do not vote, said gun policy laws were important and they supported the laws. So, pretty consistently, high level of voters there, what a state's position is on that issue, and this ties back to, I think you saw, the crime and the safety concerns are also rated high amongst respondents. Then on LGBTQ rights, would you accept a job in another state? How important are those issues? A little bit lower, only 48% said it would be important. But among women, it goes all the way up to 61%. Men, less concerned, men, only 36% said the state's LGBTQ policies were important, and they supported the laws. Moving on to racial equality policies, again, we're back up to a much higher number here. 74% said it's important. 84.2% of women said it was important. 63.4% of men said it was important. 88% of black respondents said it was important. 70% of white respondents said it was important. So pretty high level of support across demographic groups there. And then finally on abortion, whether or not, that would weigh into a decision whether or not to move to another state. 47% said it was important and they were pro-choice. That number amongst women, though, again, that climbs up over 60%. Men, it's down around 33%. So, on these issues, it became pretty clear that the single biggest differentiator on whether these issues were important to a respondent was party affiliation. With strong Democrats very much, factoring in these decisions about where to live. Republicans less so, and Republicans, when they did weigh it in, they fell on the other side of the issue, obviously. But, there is opportunity here, and I want to stress this. Brad and I have been, painting a picture here. I think that maybe, all hope is lost. It certainly isn't. We asked an open-ended question. What is Michigan's biggest advantage that would get you to stay in Michigan? And 27% said Great Lakes and the outdoors. Michigan has an advantage here with our Great Lakes, all of our recreational opportunities. We need to make sure we're taking advantage of that. Second was family and friends. That's not something we can do as much about. But coming in third at 8.8%, kind of surprising, related to the Great Lakes and outdoors, but we marked it as a separate category. Michigan's weather. The weather here is maybe not as big a deal for every single person as what we sometimes believe it is. And then fourth, jobs, opportunities, and the economic opportunities provided here in the state. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Business Leaders for Michigan is doing to make sure that we are attracting the best and the brightest here to the state. Our members care a great deal about this. We have, we released earlier this year our holistic economic development strategy, which really takes into account things that are directly related to making sure that we continue to bring talent to the state. Working with our members on internship programs, their immigration, their policies on employing immigrants, making sure that the state is doing things to attract talent. The governor with the announcement yesterday, the marketing campaign to attract individuals to the state, we supported that. It's, we do have things that we can sell, and we need to make sure that we're not just advocating with pure Michigan and the natural attractions, job attractions, those kinds of things, but making sure that talent understands that they can do well here. We need to make sure that we continue to make the state attractive to both employers and employees. You can't have one without the other. In that regard, we're working and following a lot of what's going on in Lansing, and trying to stress to our elected leaders that, hey, let's not forget history. Not too long ago, we were in a terrible economic situation, the Great Recession. We did a lot of hard work to come out of that, and one of the things we need to be careful about as we continue to make policy in the state is that we are presenting ourselves as somebody who can consistently put forward good policy, continue to prevent a positive and competitive business environment. And sometimes what we see happening, and what has often been the case in this state, is an election comes along and we kind of pinball all over the place on policy. And to the folks on the outside, it looks like we can't sustain effective policies over the long term. Our competitors in Kentucky and Texas and Indiana and Ohio don't seem to have that problem. It's been an issue here, and we need to correct it. We need to make sure that we're keeping in place those things that work and continue to work on those things that happen. We need to make sure we're a welcoming state, that we have world-class education and pathways to prosperity for all of our residents. We need to remove barriers to work. That means we need to have high quality and affordable child care, health care, and housing. And again, we need to have those vibrant, safe communities. And so our holistic economic development plan, and I'll wrap up here real quickly, it offers recommendations in areas under 5 different pillars, including place, talent, entrepreneurs and innovation, customer service, and competitive incentives. And we are working right now, the legislature has a package of bills out there designed to help protect our economic base. Things like advanced manufacturing, lightweight materials, a lot of the EV, AV, opportunities that are still out there to be had, but also looking forward and trying to diversify our base beyond just manufacturing. Some of that, data analytics, IT, and healthcare opportunities that are out there that are so important, because we can't be an economy with just one industry. We know what happens that when we get into a recession. So we need to diversify. We need economic policies that make us competitive to compete for those projects. And so that's something else we're working on right now. There's a whole long list, but I've already taken too much time, and I want to make sure that Brad and Ryan have an opportunity to speak as well. So with that, Brad, back to you.
Yeah, I'll be quick and let Ryan have plenty of time to talk about the good work that Michigan Works is doing. I just want to piggyback off where Tim was going to. There's so many great policy that are in the BLM Comprehensive Economic Development Plan, and we've got shared members, so of course it would naturally flow that a lot of our policy priorities overlap as well. I just wanted to highlight a few of the programmatic things that are happening at the Chamber and happening in Detroit that maybe folks in Lansing don't hear about as often. They know about the work we do in the policy arena, or maybe they certainly know about the Mackinac Policy Conference, but there's 90 folks who work at the Chamber, and our biggest team is our talent and education team, and folks in Lansing maybe don't know about that. They administer the Detroit Promise, which is the largest Promise program in the state. We've been doing that since 2013. Offers a 2-year or 4-year tuition-free path for anyone who graduates from any school in Detroit to 32 Michigan colleges. Prior to that, it was the Detroit Compact, a more limited, scaled-down private version of that the Chamber administered for about 25 years prior to that. We also are the home of a program called Detroit Drives Degrees, which is a collective impact model region-wide to help drive our own goal of hitting 60% degree attainment by 2030 in the region. We were very enthused to hear Governor Whitmer make that the state goal. That had been a regional goal that we had set a few years prior. And so Detroit Drives Degrees has a few areas of focus, including advancing access to post-secondary opportunities, boosting student success. It's not enough to get kids into school, but we need to get them graduating, but also retaining the local talent. So a lot of the work that we've already been talking about. So we do that through a few different programs. Detroit Reconnect, getting adults back into school. Detroit Community College Collaborative, helping to boost up the performance of our local community colleges, partnering with the mayor's Grow Detroit Young Talent program that employs Detroit students part-time in the summer so they can get employment skills and employment experience during the summer. So there are a number of programmatic things that are going on, not just at the Chamber, but in like organizations that go beyond the policy, that I want to make sure the folks in Lansing are aware of as well. But with that, we're going to hand it off to Ryan Hundt to let us know about all the great work that's going on at Michigan Works as well.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Tim. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Great to see some familiar faces and some hopefully new friends and colleagues as well. My name is Ryan Hundt. I'm the CEO for the Michigan Works Association. We are a nonprofit based here in Lansing. We do support the 16 local Michigan Works offices statewide that deliver workforce services to both job seekers and employers throughout the state through federal, state, and local funding as well. Our 16 local Michigan Works offices provide support to over 32,000 employers and a little over 675,000 job seekers each and every year. We also work very closely with higher education, with philanthropic organizations, with the state of Michigan and the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity in particular, to help focus and hone in on what are some of those critical resources that we need as a public workforce system to continue supporting increasing job retention, job growth, and ultimately, hopefully, talent attraction here in the state of Michigan as well. I'll start off just by saying I know that I'm speaking in front of folks that are focused on public policy and social research. Typically, I've been in your shoes before in these presentations. I love data. I don't have a ton of data to put up on a screen today, just due to some time constraints, but I apologize. Hopefully, though, the presentation will be just as informative as the one that Tim and Brad just gave on some challenges and also opportunities facing talent here in Michigan. Some of the headwinds that we are seeing here in the state, it's not too dissimilar from other states, especially in the Midwest, and I know that Brad and Tim just went over a few of those headwinds as well. As it relates to our public workforce system, some of those headwinds, I would say, are perceptions, especially among younger generations of talent, those in the 18 to 29 age demographic. We're also seeing some headwinds in Michigan related to labor force participation rates. Even though we have a low unemployment rate in Michigan, in some cases historically unemployment rates, not just in our state, but across the country, we're also seeing some difficulties of getting people back into the workforce. Part of that was because of COVID. Many of those workforce challenges were exacerbated by COVID, but we're also very laser focused on how can we encourage people to get back into the workforce so they can support themselves, support their families, and their communities. We're also seeing skills mismatches, especially in high wage, high growth occupations. Business Leaders for Michigan came out with a report earlier this year. I believe the statistic was something like 81% of businesses are citing talent as a major concern that may limit their ability to grow in the next year or in future years. So that skills mismatch is of obvious concern for the workforce system. We're also focused on population growth, or in the case of Michigan, population decline. Governor Whitmer has put together a great strategy along with the Population Growth Council moving forward to identify some of those challenges that we heard about today, but also how can we maximize and strengthen the assets that we have in Michigan to help reverse the course of population decline in the coming years and attract people back to Michigan, while also making sure that we are retaining those individuals that are very much an essential part of our growing economy here in the state. And then Tim also mentioned sustainable policies that focus on population growth and retention, also in a business-friendly environment. And I would just echo some of his comments earlier, where we get into situations where we have different election outcomes, especially with different parties taking over. There's not really that focused, sustainable policy or set of policies that are forward thinking on making sure that we as a state are attracting and retaining our talent. But I'm very encouraged by the work being done by folks at the Detroit Chamber, Business Leaders for Michigan, and even our colleagues across the street here at the Lansing Capitol to make sure that we are hopefully providing some support for those long-term sustainable policies. From a public policy standpoint, I'm going to talk about some efforts that we have going on at the federal level and also at the state level as it relates to workforce development. One of the key programs at the federal level that we focus on and we utilize across the Michigan Works system each and every year to support job seekers, particularly those that are lower income individuals or families, is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And this act does support individuals, it supports dislocated workers, it supports youth as well. However, similar to other mechanisms and funding support at the federal level, we're seeing quite a bit of disagreement, as you can probably imagine, should not come as any shock to all of you, disagreement in Washington, D.C. as to what constitutes quality investment into our public workforce system. Earlier this year, particularly on the Republican side of the House in Washington, D.C., we saw some efforts to reduce by a significant percentage the number of dollars that are flowing into the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, somewhere in some cases upwards of 25 to 30% of cuts to that essential programming that provides services to low-income job seekers each and every year. Fortunately, the White House and the Senate in a bipartisan fashion has supported marginal increases, but increases nonetheless in key programs alongside the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. We're continuing to monitor some activity as it relates to WIOA in the future. There is some good news, however, coming out of Washington in a somewhat bipartisan fashion. There does seem to be a renewed focus of reauthorizing that key program or set of programs under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. We are hearing from Washington, D.C. that not only is there some support on both sides of the aisle for potential increases in funding, but also modernizing that act to better reflect the opportunities and challenges that the workforce system faces, and making sure that we as a public workforce system, through the Michigan Works agencies and similar workforce development boards across the country, are able to deliver effective services in real time, but also meeting people where they are by focusing also not just on matching people with a job, but also identifying and helping to lower or eliminate barriers to employment that those individuals may face, whether that be childcare, transportation, housing, food access. So that's some encouraging news coming out of Washington, which we don't oftentimes hear very encouraging news coming out of Washington. So we're keeping our fingers crossed there. We're also at the federal level focused on the Trade Adjustment Assistance Act, or TAA. This is an essential program that has been around for decades now. In places like Michigan, with a strong manufacturing base, we oftentimes rely on programs like TAA in the event that individuals may be laid off or separated from work. In cases where their work is impacted by global trade, we've been able to support those workers to train into other occupations, either similar occupations or maybe new professions that they may be interested in through funding through programs like TAA. Unfortunately, right now, this program has gone unfunded almost for 12 months now. We're approaching on the year mark where we have not had any funding available through TAA for any new individuals who may be separated from work as a result of global trade. But we're constantly reaching out to our members of Congress and also the U.S. Department of Labor and other stakeholders to encourage them to look at funding TAA. Again, for a place like Michigan with a strong manufacturing base, we know that global trade will continue to impact workers, especially in manufacturing. And so hopefully we will be able to see some results on funding that program in the future so we can continue providing key support and services to individuals whose jobs may be impacted by global trade. Now, here in the state of Michigan, it's been a great year for public education. From an investment standpoint, I would say the same thing from workforce development as well. We've really focused on a few key priorities at the Michigan Works Association at the state level that has been very fruitful for us over the past year. One is the Going Pro Talent Fund. And if you're not familiar with the Going Pro Talent Fund, this is perhaps the most flexible, in some cases, one of the most innovative state-funded programs that ties training to individuals, but also provides businesses with the support that they need to lower some costs that they may be incurring around short-term skills training for their staff. And we're excited to see, again, for fiscal year 24 that just kicked off, the new round of Going Pro Talent Fund applications just launched earlier this week on Monday. There's, again, about $55 million that will be available in fiscal year 24 for the Going Pro Talent Fund. So businesses that have identified a training plan and have identified individuals, whether they be incumbent workers or new hires at their organization, they're able to apply for funding for those individuals to help offset some of those training costs they are incurring for short-term skills training. On an annual basis, we are seeing quite a bit of demand for the Going Pro Talent Fund. Last year, we again had about $55 million that was available for the Going Pro Talent Fund in fiscal year 23. We had a total of $108 million of requests that came in from the private sector to help access that funding. And so while we are continuing to support investments in the Going Pro Talent Fund, we're hopeful that we see an increase in funding for the Going Pro Talent Fund in future years so that we can more adequately meet the demand that is out there from the private sector for that key program. We're also very knowledgeable on providing services to individuals who have barriers to employment. Again, in cases like I can't afford a bus pass, or I have difficulty identifying affordable childcare for my kids and my family. There has been historically funding available that's administered by the local Michigan Works agencies that provides wraparound services to individuals that may be facing some of those barriers. So we're hopeful to continue pushing for funding around barrier removal and wraparound services in the future. We're also looking at youth career exploration, and this is one thing that the Michigan Works agencies for the past several years have done a really good job of, is supporting and partnering with the private sector in each of those 16 local Michigan Works agency regions, and also partnering with key stakeholders like the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity and all their philanthropic organizations to support youth career exploration. One of these statistics that I like to oftentimes refer to, I remember being at a presentation, must have been 4 or 5 years ago, down in Adrian, Michigan, and we had somebody come in and they had done a survey of high school students and trying to identify what were some of their top professions of interest that they would like to pursue post-graduation. Can anybody guess the top 2 professions that they were interested in pursuing? Still relevant today. Number 1 was professional athlete.
Video game developer.
And number 2 is actor or actress, although I don't think that fell too far off the way there. So, look, the Lions are doing better, so I don't know that we need a ton of professional athletes or significant demand for professional athletes here in Michigan, and I know that Hollywood is probably pretty difficult to break into still to this day. So we need to do a better job of encouraging and educating not only students, but also teachers, guidance counselors, parents themselves, so they can be champions in their children's future, to help them understand, just like Tim and Brad were mentioning, we have a ton of career opportunities here in Michigan, and if we are not educating individuals and students until they are in 11th or 12th grade, we get survey results like the one I just referenced a few years ago. So to get into the middle schools, in some cases the elementary schools, to help students understand what are the careers of today, what are the careers of the future, what are the skill sets you will need in the future to be competitive on a national or a global scale. That all starts with youth career exploration. I'll talk about that a little bit further here. Lastly, we're also focused on short-term certifications and credentials, stackable credentials that can then lead to additional post-secondary opportunities at the community college level, at the four-year institution level, at flagship universities like MSU. And so short-term certifications and careers and stackable credentials is something that we're taking very seriously. We think that there are some opportunities available there where we can braid or leverage some of these resources that I've already talked about, such as removing barriers and providing wraparound services while also supporting individuals' pursuit of stackable credentials in the future, is a very noble effort that can be undertaken by a well-funded public workforce system, not just in Michigan, but throughout the country. So some opportunities that we have in front of us and some best practices that we've seen through the Michigan Works agencies over the past few years. Part of it, again, has been that flexible funding, and I'll tie that alongside partnerships with higher education. There was an example in Oakland County earlier this year, a mother of a few children, single mother, low-income family. She was only a few credits shy of graduating from one of the four-year institutions down in Oakland County. You can probably guess which one. And unfortunately, she ran into some tough times, was laid off from her job, had no means by which to support her family, but also continue with her education because the tuition bill was coming due. And not only was the tuition bill coming due, she also had some difficulty purchasing materials and books and supplies needed to finish off that last semester so she could get to graduation and be able to walk with her peers. By contacting her local Michigan Works office, that local Michigan Works office in Oakland County was able to identify philanthropic dollars, but also support at the federal and the state level to leverage some additional funding to help not only cover the cost of tuition, but also get her the books and materials that she needed to finish off that last semester. And she ended up graduating and is now in a sustainable long-term career in her degree as well. So that's a great example of how we can braid flexible funding also with the partnerships with the higher education offices throughout the state. Also, philanthropic support. We've seen quite a bit of interest in supporting talent and workforce development efforts throughout Michigan and throughout the country, really probably in the last 5 to 10 years, more so than at any time in our history. Not only are the private sector employers taking more of a vested interest in investing in the future of their workforce through training, but we're also seeing a pretty critical flow of philanthropic dollars come in as well. Again, I'll use Oakland County as an example. During COVID, they received support from the Ballmer Foundation to provide child care subsidies for low-income individuals in Oakland County. So if you were an individual in Oakland County and you qualified on a number of other factors as well, you were able to receive a child care subsidy or a scholarship that would help pay for affordable child care in and around Oakland County so those individuals could continue working and supporting their families. So again, partnerships with philanthropic organizations has remained a key part of workforce development throughout the country. And then going back to the youth career exploration component, one of the key programs that we have launched throughout the state of Michigan with key partnerships in a range of spaces has been the My Career Quest events. If you've heard of these events or if you haven't heard of these events typically bring in anywhere from 1,200 high school students on the way up to 8,000 to 10,000 high school students, typically over a 1 to 2 day period, and they can come in and have hands-on career exploration opportunities with private sector businesses in their communities and in their regions. Typically, they're focused on one of 4 different industry verticals. We've seen manufacturing, healthcare, IT, business services, and this is a great opportunity for higher education to also get involved as well to help the students not only see and demonstrate what are the career opportunities I have in my backyard, but also what are the educational components that then lead to those career opportunities now and into the future. So if you have not gotten involved in the My Career Quest event here in the Lansing area, being situated at Michigan State University, they just had it over at the Lansing Center a few months ago, and they had thousands of students from across the Tri-County District here in the Lansing area walk through and have some of those awesome hands-on opportunities to learn more about careers and education that will then lead to sustainable jobs in the future. So those are some of the opportunities that we have in front of us, again, through the public workforce system in the Michigan Works agencies here in Michigan. If you have any questions, I think we do have time for Q&A, but really appreciate the time from all of you to be here today and look forward to partnering with all of you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you all for those presentations and perspectives. It's not an easy system where you have business and you have public education, higher education, organizations such as Ryan's, all trying to work together both on a local, regional, and statewide basis to create the talent pool that's needed for the jobs that are here and that are coming. If we have any questions, I've got a mic. Okay, you're way in the back. Okay, yeah. Hang on.
Hi, thank you. That was a great presentation. I just had a couple of questions. So a little bit of background about me. So I am a mid-30s Black professional who was born and raised in Seattle and moved out here for college and ended up establishing a family. And a couple of things I wondered, you guys talked about racial equity. Is there any more nuance to that in terms of the questions that you asked? So a couple of things I think about is like gentrification that's happening in the state. I think about segregation. I think about access to schools. So my children are both in the Lansing Public Schools, and for anybody that lives here in Lansing and knows the Lansing Public Schools, we've got some struggles there. Are we looking at those sorts of questions in terms of retaining talent and sustaining talent over time? And professionally, I work in healthcare and philanthropy, and we're very invested in placing providers across the state, and providership, whether it's we're talking social workers, physicians, psychiatrists, very hard to place. We sort of all know that here. So I'm just curious about some of those nuances, whether you're looking into that specific information.
Yeah, I can take that. It didn't, not in this poll is the short answer. I think there was so much to ask in this poll that we didn't have the capacity to get that granular. What I would say in a macro level for us at the chamber, we're partnering with the Gallup organization. A few years ago after the murder of George Floyd, Gallup made a 100-year commitment to do deep dive studies on they call it the Gallup Center for Black Voices, to do regular research on the Black community and try to do better understand the needs of the Black community. And they were looking for partners at the local level throughout the country. In Detroit, the chamber is their local partner, and so we have a multi-year commitment with Gallup to do local research on our local African American community. So not now, but those are the types of questions I could see us doing in a partnership with Gallup going forward.
I'll just add, I'll go back to this slide right here. It did come up. We didn't go into depth on it, as Brad said, but it did come up in that open-ended question, or not open-ended, but we listed several factors and asked them to rank on a 1 to 10 scale. What's most important? These were the top 5, but just below being close to other family members at 7.5 was access to good public schools. So it did come up. And then a little bit further down the list, good public transportation and walkable communities at 6.6. It is on folks' minds. It's just it didn't rise to the level of these other issues.
All right, I have long thought that the issue about attracting and retaining talent made some sense, but it was missing a big element. Talent wants to go where other talent is. Talented, creative, imaginative people, innovative people want to be around others of that ilk. So it's about retaining the talent we have, attracting the talent we have, but growing the talent that we can grow here in the state of Michigan. And we can't start to wait until kids are in the 11th or 12th grades. I mean, those programs are fine, but you got to start early on. So at the Henry Ford, where I work, the Henry Ford Museum, we now host the Invention Conventions, the Michigan State Invention Convention and the U.S. National Invention Convention. These are for kids K through 12. These kids, some of them at the higher end, are winding up getting patents for their inventions. Some of them have participated in the program from the time they were in kindergarten through 12th grade. Now think about what kind of mindset you've now developed in kids that have had 10 years of thinking creatively, inventing actual product. So we need to think that the talent pipeline doesn't start like when you've got a high school junior or senior. We need to be thinking about kids at that earliest age. That is an incredibly important part of developing and sustaining a talent pipeline.
Anyone else? Dave?
Thank you for doing this. It's only the most important thing facing a state, so it's good to see somebody's paying attention. Too bad there's not more legislators here, quite frankly. That's really disappointing to me because this is the #1 issue that will determine the success of the state over the next 20 years. I don't think most people realize we saw the Republican respondents in this poll talking about going to Texas because their taxes are low. We have the 5th lowest state and local tax burden in the country, according to the Tax Foundation right now. The 5th lowest. We run the low tax experiment, guys. It failed miserably. We were a top 20 state in taxes 30 years ago. Now we're a bottom 5, and we haven't really made things better for anybody, I don't think. So it's really interesting. But I wanted to ask on these, in the survey, and maybe we got at it a little bit with that last answer, most of the folks that I've seen when I've been involved in these in the past, people will leave, go to big cities. They don't go to Odessa, Texas. They go to Houston. They go to Dallas. They go to and they go to Illinois. They go to Chicago. Is that still a factor here today with all the changes that have gone on with COVID and people working from home? Is big, strong, vibrant urban areas really the place where kids want to go? Or has COVID changed everything?
Did you look at the specific answers? I would say, so Dave, we when we did the survey, Richard coded the answers for us. So I can't say, exactly what people said. The responses tended to be Georgia, North Carolina, the way Richard coded them. So I don't know if the people who said Georgia said Atlanta, or they said, they may have said Athens or Savannah. So I can't tell you exactly what they responded, but I will tell you generally the way I read the survey was that it continues to be, large urban areas. I don't know, Tim, if you had a different takeaway from that.
The only city, we gave them options, and then we asked the open-ended question. So with the open-ended question, it was the kind of answers that Brad talked about. The only city option we gave them was Chicago. The others were, Texas as a state, California as a state. I will say that the Census Bureau has a very, in partnership with, who are they at Harvard? Or not Harvard, Opportunity Insight. I can't remember where those folks are located, but a very good tool that actually tracks, movement of young people. I think 16 to 25, and where they're moving to in and out of across the country, and that data, based on my brief look at it, would support what you're saying, Dave, that they're, they're going to Chicago, they're going to New York City, they're going to LA, they're going to Houston, they're going to Atlanta. So I think your theory is correct.
Of the three different places we asked them about, Chicago was the most popular, and Chicago had nothing to do with politics, right? It was because they wanted to go live in a big city.
Can you tell me what the role is that either the colleges or universities can or do play in helping to retain these talents?
I see Katie back there. Katie, you want to answer that question?
No, I think that's.
I
don't know. Okay, go ahead.
I'll take it, because I'm involved in some of those activities at Michigan State University. So I don't think there's any question that universities such as Michigan State and others that are in urban centers or large metropolitan areas, even those that are in smaller regions across the country, are beginning to understand better their role in terms of working outside of their fences with the business sector as well as K-12 education in figuring out ways to grow talent. In terms of retaining talent, at Michigan State University, I think about 75%, 78%?
It's 50% remain within Michigan.
50% remain, is that right?
I use the 62.
Yeah, I believe it's a little bit higher. I think it's 62% stay in the state of Michigan. And so also through some of the newer programs in entrepreneurship and tech transfer that we've developed at Michigan State University, trying to keep those that are growing businesses here in the state as students as well has become a priority. So, but I do think universities across the country are getting more and more aware of that. As a matter of fact, I'll be going to a conference here next week on the matter of anchoring institutions. So what role does a university play in economic prosperity within the region it's in?
I think we have a question up front. We also did do a survey for the state universities that I presented a little bit on last time that confirmed most of the results here about what recent graduates are looking for and how they made their decisions. One thing on Dave's point, though, is that we had a heat map so they could choose anywhere. It was almost all metropolitan areas. It wasn't always in the center of the city, though, so folks actually were happy with large parts of southeast Michigan, for example, as well as the areas in the western part of the state.
My question goes to the fellows on the right here. My name is Mary Pollack, and I've been around state government for many, many years. I'm one of align my questions with Dave Waymeyer's comments. In the last 30 or 40 years, we've elected to, we went from a system of heavy funding of higher education, tuitions were low for everybody, to defunding higher education to the point where they needed, at least the ones that have constitutional authority to do so, raise their tuitions so they're extraordinarily high now. And we've gone to these specialized reconnect and these kinds of programs. From your perspective, for representing employers with, I think, a bigger vision than just lower taxes, which is what businesses usually want, lower taxes, not thinking beyond what that does. What do you think is the best strategy for supporting higher education training? This, what we're doing now, which is a spot kind of thing, or throwing a lot of money at it, keep tuition, entry levels easy? Which strategy is the best strategy for growth in the future, for prosperity broadly, for a good middle class?
I mean, I'm happy to defer to Tim. They've done, Business Leaders for Michigan have done a ton of work. I mean, unless you want me to answer, Tim, but you guys have really.
Let's hear what you have to
Well,
say.
I don't think it's necessarily an either or, right? I think we have to have strategies like Reconnect for generations that where college going at age 18 wasn't the emphasis, or people who slipped through the cracks. But I think, you know, organizations like the Chamber and Business Leaders for Michigan have not been shy in the past about the need to invest in the bottom line for universities too, to help lower tuition costs at the front end. You know, I think but it's our perspective has always been, and Tim, you can jump in if you think I'm wrong, but that it shouldn't be without strings attached either. I think there's it's a yes and conversation. Yeah, we can invest more, but we can also do things better in our higher education system.
And you know, it's not just an issue of tuition as well. It's also an issue of how universities and colleges, especially top-ranked universities and colleges, train their students. You know, if you ask folks, there's a reason why there are so many out-of-state students at the University of Michigan. And there's a reason why many of their students don't stay in Michigan. Top-ranked universities want their students to move about internationally. So it's not just a question of affordability, it's also a question of some of the things that Tim and Brad's poll pointed out, is what is attractive to those college graduates as a state? And what are they looking for in terms of the places they want to live? So,
I'll just add that Business Leaders for Michigan has spent pretty much the time between 2012 and 2017, really focusing on in particular our public four-year institutions. And supported, very, very, loudly at that time, increasing state appropriations. And we had some success, but admittedly not as much as we would have liked. I don't think the people who are making those decisions are elected. And they are listening to their voters. And the problem is that most voters think that higher ed isn't providing the same value proposition that it always did. That's the way they feel. That may be wrong. I think it's wrong. I mean, it's, the numbers, the data clearly supports that the more education you have, the better off you are in terms of lower unemployment rates, higher incomes. We all know that, but that's not what people think. They aren't seeing the same value proposition that they did even 10 years ago. So we have an image, to me it's as much a sort of an image and a marketing problem as anything.
Yeah, we've done, as I mentioned, we've done a lot of polling on, not just on this. We do about 3 polls with Richard a year on other policy questions. And one of the questions we focused on historically is your view of higher education, and this isn't just 18 to 29-year-olds, this is Michiganders generally, their views of the value of higher education, and the split amongst Michiganders is really staggering, the view of higher education, particularly public higher education.
I had a follow-up about attraction. So your survey and our survey were both of people in Michigan talking about whether they would stay. But the last time we looked at it, Michigan didn't really stand out that much in terms of its young people leaving compared to neighboring states. Where we stood out was inability to get folks to come from those states who weren't already in Michigan. So would the same kinds of strategies apply, or do people outside of the state not necessarily share those kind of positives about Michigan to come here?
Well, I think that's probably the next step in this. We doing some, maybe trying to get at those attitudes, maybe some focus groups, of outer staters. So I don't know, Matt, the answer to that question, but we could certainly find out.
We've already discussed it a little bit. It is a more complicated research question, right? Because the opinions of folks from the Midwest is certainly going to be different of the opinion of folks from California. That's going to be different from the opinions of folks from Florida and the East Coast. So it's probably not just one poll. It's probably some focus groups. It's probably a couple different research instruments. So it's been discussed. It's just a matter of trying to pull it all together and try and figure out how to make it work.
I will say that we do have done some research where it shows that to the extent we are pulling people from out of state, Grand Rapids is getting kids from small towns in northern Indiana and Ohio. We are getting some kids back from Chicago.
It might be, as you folks think about the next iteration, doing some polling or focus group of out-of-state students at our universities, such as MSU, U of M, Grand Valley, and Wayne State. What would keep you here? Why are you here? And what would keep you here? Our thanks again to Ryan, Tim, and Brad. Appreciate them sharing information and perspective. As Matt noted, our next forum will be on December 13th. And thank you again for sharing your day with us.